Hello, Honors 410 students. I hope everyone had a great weekend. So just to start out today's video with a little bit of housekeeping, first off, just a reminder to keep up on reading response journals when we have reading due for a class. So far, most of you have done a great job with that, but just as a reminder to everyone, it's one of those pieces I think is harder to keep track of in this format than when we're meeting regularly in an in-person format. So just having that in mind. Additionally, a reminder to please leave at least one substantive comment per each one of our online class sessions. I'm going to close down the discussions after a full week has passed from when that class period would have ended if we were still meeting in person. So that's the cutoff point to leave a comment and get credit for it. The overwhelming majority of you have been totally fine in that regard. Please consider this a no news is good news situation. So if you are not hearing from me with any questions or concerns, rest assured you're doing what you need to do. For those of you who I have not yet heard from in this format, I am planning to reach out to people probably starting either later today or tomorrow. So Monday or Tuesday, maybe leading into Wednesday. Just to make sure we're on the same page and understanding what's expected of the class, or to see if there are any technology issues that are perhaps keep holding us up from being able to do this successfully. But yeah, overall, I'm really happy with what everyone's been doing. Thank you for the hard work you're putting in to make this adjustment. I think as successful as it can be under the circumstances. So some other reminders. So our final Flash cluster, Flash cluster number 6, you have your Flash submissions due for our next class on Wednesday. I thought the format worked well from my perspective, at least last time, where I basically just posted each of the individual submissions from students and then had their own little kind of sub threads within the larger discussion thread where students could respond to them. And I thought the feedback was looking really good from what I saw. So I'll do that again for submissions this time. Please do try to have those submitted no later than when our class would have started on Wednesday, though if you're able to get them up sooner, I appreciate that because that allows me to put these videos and all this work up sooner so everyone can kind of start working with it. But Levi took advantage of the opportunity to include an audio clip with of him both reading the work and discussing a little bit. Please feel free to do that. So I think in the first post I made about it, I suggested videos. So video, audio, whatever you're kind of comfortable with is fine and from that perspective. So at minimum, you're still expected to upload the text of the piece, and that's what I'll be looking over for the purposes of grading and giving you more detailed feedback in Canvas. But for sharing it with your peers, again, a written version of it, but then also you're welcome, encouraged to do an audio or video file. I'm not going to penalize you if you're not able to do that or not comfortable doing that, but I think it is a good addition just to give you a chance to talk about the work. And again, sometimes I think we get things out of a work when we hear the author reading it that we don't necessarily pick up on just in reading it on the page. So I think that is useful. Okay, and then on a related note, so group 3 for group-led discussions, their work is due on Wednesday, talking about the Underground Railroad. Please do make sure that that's uploaded similarly no later than when class would have started for our Wednesday class session. But yeah, if you can get that up earlier. For Wednesday's class, because we have Flash Cluster as well as a group-led discussion, I'm not actually sure that I'm even going to do a video lecture, or I might do a really brief one, because that's going to kind of take up most of our class time, so to speak, or our class content at least, for Wednesday's session. So in any event, again, when the start of our class time would have been is kind of the standard for when I'm expecting work to be up by, but if you can get it in sooner, much appreciated. And I think it was group 3, maybe group 4, that had messaged me with a question about video content. And it was a really good question. The question basically was about whether it needed to be someone actually just talking into the camera like I do for these video lectures, or if it could be voiceover of a PowerPoint or similar slides. And the answer is either or both, whatever is kind of most comfortable to you. I'm open to experimenting with other forms as well, as long as it's mostly original content that the group has developed. It's totally fair game for these purposes. So it's a great question. I expect we're all going to learn a little bit from this, not only for this class, but for some of my Honors 110 classes. I have them doing their first video presentations this week, and I expect coming out of seeing what all of these classes do, I at least will have a better sense of what students are doing for this, and I hope you all will as well. And we can kind of adapt for future ones if it feels appropriate. But I appreciate everyone who's doing this as sort of guinea pigs in this process. Rest assured, I am taking that into account when I do grading for these, and kind of assuming the best and giving some benefit of the doubt, knowing that you had groups in person to kind of model things after, but you didn't have the same advantage of seeing other groups do it this way, which I know is different. Okay, so then as one last housekeeping note, the workshop submission schedule is up. So thank you for the overwhelming majority of you who did send me emails with your preferences and availability. There are only a very small number who did not. So again, I assumed that those folks were able to go whenever and didn't really have a preference. So I plugged you in kind of where we needed to in the schedule. If anyone does find that I misunderstood your preferences, or one of those people who was not able to submit a preference realize that, oops, I really can't do that date, please let me know as soon as possible. We can try to make some trades and adjustments if we need to. We have a little bit of wiggle room where I can conceivably move someone one class later than I'd intended for the workshop to go. It's a little bit messy if we do that. I'd really prefer not to, but at the same time, if that's what we need to do for someone to be able to successfully put forth a workshop draft, it is a possibility. So please let me know your situation if there are those kinds of issues for you. But again, your expectation for that is to have uploaded your assignment before what would have been the start of class time for that class, and then I will put it forward in the, I think I'm going to put forward in the file section rather than in the discussion thread, but as the workshop submissions for that time, that's going to be essentially the homework reading for everyone for the next class. So students will read that, write their workshop letters, and then our discussion threads are going to be focused on discussing those pieces at a little more depth than we have with the flash fiction and flash nonfiction submissions we've looked at so far. So we'll still talk about all that a little bit more. One of our upcoming classes, I think it's next Wednesday, or next Monday, excuse me, I have this planned for, is going to be doing a practice workshop where I'm going to put forth a shorter piece for us to read that is in sort of draft form. I'm not sure exactly which piece I'm going to use. I might even use one of my old writing pieces for this purpose, and so that we can kind of explore from a perspective of again what's already working, but also getting into a little bit more critical feedback and kind of modeling how we're going to do that. Okay, so to transition though into our last leg here of the Underground Railroad. So similar to the last time we discussed the book in this format, we're not going to come close to covering everything that's covered in these pages. I'm going to hit what to me are a handful of kind of highlights or particularly interesting moments for us to consider. But again, in the discussion thread and in your reading and response journals, feel free to weigh in whatever is sort of most interesting to you. And feel free to respond to each other. I did have someone ask if it counts the same to start a new thread versus responding to comments others had left. Absolutely, especially depending on when you participate. It might be there's already a lively discussion happening. If you want to hop in on that's absolutely equal in credit in terms of starting your own comment. So either or a combination of both is great. Feel free to tackle that kind of as feels right to you, but make sure you are again leaving at least one substantive comment there. Okay, so to hit a few points from this reading, so on page 282, there's a late paragraph that starts with Indiana was a slave state. And it talks a little bit about this idea of the soil there and things steeping in it. And I did want to kind of probe a little bit of what students made of that, what that means in terms of something steeping in the soil of a place, what Whitehead is sort of getting at there. To stop at another spot on page 290, in the first paragraph, the last couple sentences, Cora changes the topic, changes the subject of what they're talking about there. And I'm curious what people make of that, why she decided to change topics, what that kind of says about her character and what she's thinking at that moment. I'm interested in seeing what we think about that. And there's this line about sometimes a useful delusion is better than a useless truth. And I'm curious what people make of that. A useful delusion is better than a useless truth. How we unpack that, how we parse that, particularly in this context, more broadly, kind of what we think, if we sort of agree with that or if that seems problematic. I'm just sort of interested in what people can kind of make of that. Going on to page 301, there's this reference to Cora's mother, Mabel. So the beginning of the novel sort of establishes that she ran away, and we get kind of this sense of, I would call it almost bitterness over the course of the novel, where Cora is kind of resentful of her mother for almost abandoning her at Randall's. And kind of, we finally get a sense. We get this kind of cutaway scene, sort of like we got for Ridgeway and for Ethel earlier on in the book and for some other characters. But on 301, we get a sense of what actually happened to Mabel. And it's not like this is a trick question. It spells out pretty explicitly what happened to her. But I did want to raise it just as a discussion point so we could kind of talk a little bit about what happens to her and kind of how we understand that, right? Because I think it does affect our understanding of the story, certainly the understanding of the character, right? Because I think that we're sort of set up to just sort of have everything filtered through Cora and kind of think that her mother did abandon her. And that doesn't really seem to be the case once we read this. One could still make an argument to an extent that that's the case, but at least that wasn't Mabel's intention, I wouldn't say. So kind of looking back to what happened to her and why this is sort of important, right? What this represented to Cora, what this represented to Ridgeway. Obviously, they both kind of pined after Mabel in their own ways for most of their lives. And to find out what really happened to her, it's sort of in some ways is less impressive, I would suggest, or at least less setting a blazing trail, right, where she kind of got away from Ridgeway, or where she just forgot about Cora. It's really a very different story. So I'm curious of students' reactions to that and kind of why we think that Whitehead might have constructed that story and presented it this way, especially at this late stage of the novel. But okay, and then let's see. Page 313. This is the last place I'm going to go for this section of the reading. Although, again, please feel free to open it up in your own directions as well. But there's this idea of someone putting it behind them. And particularly talk about the concept of slavery. But this idea of whether Cora can put behind her the life that she previously lived and this experience of running away as well. And I wanted to pose the question to the class of what we think of this. Do we think that someone actually can put such a life-defining experience behind them, or if that's always going to be a significant part of them, or something that they either think of on a daily basis or even subconsciously is kind of affecting them in the day-to-day, even years, decades, essentially a lifetime after they literally were living in it. And then more specifically, I guess a question is about Cora herself. Do we think she'll actually be able to put this behind her? I have my own kind of feelings about this, and I think the text gives us some clues, but there's no definitive answer, right? This is largely open to our interpretation and kind of what we make of the text and what we ourselves kind of project on it. So those are just some key points where I would kind of lead us in the reading. And so I'd love to hear what students think of all those points in the discussion thread. So feel free to weigh in on any or all of those. But again, also please feel free to open things up in your own directions or raise questions of your own. And I'll be really interested to hear what people have to say. All right, so thanks again for tuning in. As always, please keep me posted if you have questions. I know with this online format, you can't just raise your hand and immediately ask the question. You can't come talk to me after class if it's an individual thing. So I'm trying to keep up on reading every single comment that's left. When I put likes on those, I think I mentioned this earlier, but that's not necessarily an indication that I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying or think it's an outstanding comment, more so an acknowledgement that I have read it. So if it's not something I'm explicitly replying to in text, you know that I'm still marking that I did see it and that I'm making note that you had said it. And oftentimes when I don't comment on it, it's more just a matter of either I'm leaving it open for other students to comment on before I get into it, or because you just said it really nicely, right? And I just don't have a ton of substance to add, and so I want to let it stand on its own. But keep weighing in there. If you ask a question, you do not get an answer from me, either because it seems like I overlooked a comment in the discussion thread, or in the off chance there's an email that I don't get back to you on. Please ask again. Again, it's one of those things where with the online format, it's a little awkward. I'm not 100% sure I'm getting every question students are asking, and I know it can seem as though it just kind of slips on by in that case. So please do let me know if you come upon that, or if you have questions that are kind of unresolved at any point. All right, thanks again, everyone, and I will see you next time.